Hi there, and welcome back to the CKM Red Rugby League channel. Hope you are all well. We are just hours away from another Super League round kicking off. We are into round two. Round one is done and dusted. You will notice a slightly drab-looking backdrop. Unfortunately, we are having technical issues today, but we are persevering through it to bring you all the team news that is readily available from all the upcoming round fixtures. So with that, we'll jump straight into game one, and we'll see Warrington taking on Castleford. And Warrington are going to be the outright favourites for this one. Castleford putting in a bitterly disappointing performance against Salford over the weekend, losing out 26-16. Warrington really welcoming back Toby King and Jack Hughes to the club for making sure that they're coming back from injury. Those two were missing last week, given an extra week just to make sure that they were right and not carrying any knocks. But on the flip side, for Warrington, Darryl Clark will be missing through concussion protocol. You saw him leave the field early against the Leeds Rhinos on Channel 4 there. And he will miss this game. Oliver Holmes as well will not get a chance at running out against his old club. He's missing through suspension. He was given a 1-game suspension that now upped to 2 games. So he will be missing this one and the next one. Warrington are going to be the outright favourites here. Darryl Powell, returning to his former side. He knows it's going to be a frosty reception. He knows it's going to be a fiery game, and he will lean into that. He'll do everything he can to try and get under Castleford's skin early. You saw that last week. Castleford really let themselves down on penalties, essentially allowing Mark Sneed to kick Salford to victory off the tee, and really putting them to the blade, and Castleford just not having a response. Really employing that aggressive Lee Radford style of coaching and play out on the field, and not able to really stick with Salford, who just kept their discipline, kept their heads in those tough areas of the game. Jake Mamo had a hot and cold game for me during that match, and he'll be wanting to make a better performance against his former employers. A multitude of missed tackles you saw for the Dion Cross try. That when he shot out the line, Joe Burgess just immediately spotted that gap, ghosted through, opened right out, and the Castleford Tigers were left all at sea at that point, and they need to shore up defensively and make sure that they keep their discipline in this game. They're facing a Warrington side that were good in patches. They faced off at the weekend against a Leeds Rhinos side that really kept their intensity, really upped the game after losing James Bentley in the first 16 minutes, and really took the game to Warrington. They were in aspects and areas very lucky to come away from that game with the 2 points. So, but going over the previous form between these sides, Warrington winning 4 of the last 5 meetings, you've got to say that they are going to be the outright favourites for this game. They constantly put the pressure on. You've seen that they are very good at going through structure as long as that they can maintain that. Ashton had a great game on the wing. Wrench had a really good game out on the edges as well, and unfortunately, just little parts of his game will probably cost him a spot in the centre with Toby King coming back, because they're definitely not going to have Peter Matautia missing out against his former side, and he was one of the shining stars in that Warrington side. Really powerful runner, really aggressive when he carried the ball, and really impressed for me. So I'm going to have to tip Warrington for a win in this one, and I can see it potentially being a close game if Castleford can keep their discipline. If Castleford try and pull this one into an arm wrestle, they're not going to come out on top in this. But I'm going to say Warrington. I'm going to go straight off the bat and go Warrington 13 plus for me on this one. I just think that based on how Castleford performed, I know that was round one and everyone's a little bit rusty. But for me, Castleford are outrightly, they're not really standing a chance, and Warrington are your clear favourites for this one. We'll move into game two. It is the Friday night fixture. It is Wigan versus Leeds. Wigan winning 3 of the last 5 meetings between these two sides in what's typically low-scoring games. But it's interesting to take note of the fact that the last 2 times that these two sides have played, Leeds kept Wigan to 0. I know that these are 2 very different-looking sides from last year, both carrying a lot of injuries, both having to rotate squads in and around, and Leeds are going to be doing it tough this week. No Richie Myler, still no further news as to what the nature of his groin injury is, but he is not named in the 19-man squad. David Fussatua misses out through concussion protocol. He copped a heavy knock from Ben Curry last week in that game against Warrington. Saw him leave the field and not re-emerge after the second half. For the second half, sorry. But Leeds, on a positive note, have named Harry Newman. They did name Newman last week. He didn't play, so we're likely to see a Newman-Briscoe combination out on the right, and then over to the left, you'll have Sutcliffe and Handley, and Jack Walker will be your fullback with Blake Austin running in at 6 after he served his 1-match ban that kept him out of the Warrington game. But speaking of suspensions, James Bentley, Brad Dwyer, both unavailable through suspension. The suspension of Bentley has been up to 4 games now from 3, so he'd have missed this game regardless of how his appeal went. And Dwyer is serving a 1-match ban, so will be available next week for the Rhinos. But over to Wigan, and they're missing Ian Thornley. He's the only real change to this squad by the looks of things. You saw him pull up with an ankle, what looked to be a lower leg, maybe ankle injury in that win over Hull KR, and he had to leave the field. Wigan have still not given much of an update besides the fact that he will not play this week. So we'll have to wait and see what the nature of that injury is. Wigan will likely line up as they did last week, with Jay Field impressing at fullback, especially with the news that Bevan French will not be returning from Australia within the next few weeks after he tested positive for COVID as he was about to board his flight to the UK. So he is now in a 2-week enforced isolation period back in Australia. But Matty Pete has said that he will be on the next available flight. So it will be Jay Field at the back. You will probably see Hardacre in one centre with maybe Bibby in the other. And then Wigan will have to try and rotate through their ranks and pull another winger in. But it's really interesting to see how Wigan played last week. A really loose, unrefined playing style, really different from that rigid play system that we saw them endure under Adrian Lamb for a while. You know, Fields' first try, little kicking behind, chip and chase. They know the kind of speed that he's got. Noticed that the fullback was in the line and just went straight over the top with the Hail Mary play. Worked out perfectly. And again, I think it was Marshall's try. Just the offload from Field at the back, given a little bit of free license to play with. You see that when Sixers are moved into the fullback role, they still offer that creative license. And it worked out really well. So we're going to be a real danger on the edges. You're going to have to watch out for them going early with the speed that they've got, because there is not a single player in that Rhinos squad, maybe even in Super League, with the exception of Regan Grace, that's going to keep up with Jai Field once he gets those legs pumping. Leeds, really, really strong showing against Warrington, and bitterly disappointing to not come away from that match with points. They put in a really positive performance, despite the fact that disciplinary issues have let them down. The Bentley red card, the Dwyer sin binning, all those things eventually costing Leeds in that game, and some decisions not going their way either. But Leeds need to channel that now. Instead of going back into themselves and focusing on the negatives of that game, they need to grow from the positives of that performance, because they were the stronger side despite being at a detriment. Darryl Powell himself said it after the game. The better side lost on the day. But Leeds have got a lot of positives to take. Newman coming back from injury will be a huge boost, and he adds so much danger and so much power on that edge for Leeds. So I'm still not going to be able to realistically look past Wigan for this one. I know that last week I said that Wigan are in a bit of a rebuild period, and that they've really got to iron out some of their issues. But based on how they performed last week against Hull KR, I'm going to have to say Wigan by 1-12 on this one. It's going to be a tight game. Cust is doing a really good job of steering this side around. The Wigan pack looked really strong, really aggressive. But it's just going to be the edges for me. The edges are going to be where this game's won and lost. Sutcliffe at times can come in too far. We saw Briscoe jamming in too far off his wing and leaving gaps like that. When you've got players like Liam Marshall and Jake Bibby on the edges who've got pace to burn, you can't be allowing them that kind of space to be able to exploit you on the edges. And if Briscoe's going to come in off his wing, that's going to happen all day long, unfortunately, and it's going to be a long day at the office for Leeds. We will go to Game 3 then, and we are on to St Helens versus Hull FC. Saints have won all 5 of the last 5 meetings between these two sides, so it's a pretty damning statistic for the Black and Whites, who are once more without the services of Jake Connor, as he serves a suspension, as well as Andre Savelio. He will not be available. He was done for use of the knees. So 2 very important players to this Hull FC side missing. Jamie Shaw not looking terrible on his return as well. So he's going to potentially be your fullback for that game. But Hull FC, they did it tough against Wakefield over the weekend. Brought down to 12 men. Had to really stick tough with a Wakefield side that were causing issues through the middle of the field. David Fifita doing what David Fifita does, eat up meters, find offloads, break tackles, and Hull FC really struggled with that. And they're going to really struggle against this St Helens pack that has the likes of Sione Matautia, Curtis Sirenen, Morgan Knowles, all in there, Alex Wormsley, who are just going to bust them straight up the middle unless they start getting really hard up in the faces of St Helens. You saw Catalans tried to do it last week, and Catalans have got a very strong pack as well. But this St Helens team, they will run you through the middle if they can, if you allow them to. So for me, Hull FC, if they're going to be in this game, it's going to be about limiting St Helens in that first 20 minutes. The first 20-minute period of this game, it has to be about throwing St Helens off their systems, off their play style, and really forcing them to come up with some creative plays to break them down. We saw Catalans have to do it last week. The only way that they broke St Helens down was a Josh Drinkwater kicking behind for Fuad Yaha, because of how tough and how structured this St Helens defensive system is. You know, we saw Conrad Hurrell last week, really given free roam, realistically, to come into the middle, take some pressure off his forwards, but also busting tackles on the edges. Hull are going to have to do what they can to make sure they're limiting him, because otherwise you'll just see yet another repeat of last week with Conrad Hurrell taking smaller men on the edges on, bumping off and then finding a man in space. And, you know, last week it was James Roby. It could be anyone. It could be absolutely anyone. And St Helens are very good at pouring players through the middle in support because they've always got someone on the shoulder. I mean, if you look to Hull FC's stats here, last win against St Helens was round 4 of the 2017 Super League season, and St Helens have limited Hull FC to 18 points or less in their last 10 meetings. That is terrifying. That's a harsh statistic to overcome for Hull FC. They're going to have a real hard time staying in this game unless they can either limit St Helens' point scoring or pile on the points themselves. But they need to do 18. They need to do better than 18 points, because I've not seen many sides being able to keep this caliber of St Helens side down to 18 points or less. So, I mean, there were positives in that whole performance. They played really well in patches. But again, it was just inconsistency. If they can stick with it, remain consistent and work hard in the middle, I think that they stand some form of chance against St Helens. But for me, this is St Helens 13 plus written all over it. Hull have just got bad history against St Helens. St Helens are looking the goods in what was a grand final rematch last week, and they made Catalans look like a team that barely scraped the 8 last year. So it's good. It's going to be a really physical encounter. It's going to be a really tough game, but Hull FC are going to have to really dig deep. And I know that they're carrying a lot of injuries, and St Helens are pretty much running at a full strength squad, with the exception of Regan Grace, who'd be their first choice winger if it weren't for that bicep injury keeping him out. But they're going to have to work hard. And we'll go over to the Huddersfield Giants versus Hull KR. Giants winning 4 of the last 5 meetings with Hull, with the Robins. High scoring game, average of 45.4 points scored in the last 5 meetings between these two sides. So it's going to be a big point scoring game, either a tight one or Huddersfield blowout for me. I think that Huddersfield looked really good last week against a Toulouse side that, yes, is under a complete rebuild, just weeks out from Super League after losing Coralia and Ford. They've lost integral parts of their spine. But as a Super League side, it's your job to have the depth to be able to cover those. And at the minute, Toulouse are not showing that depth. It came as a little bit of a shock last week when the Giants decided to give Will Price another week before unleashing him at fullback. I thought that against Toulouse, where we anticipated that it wouldn't be too much of a challenge, that it'd be a good game to unleash Price, give him a little bit of artistic license at fullback, see how he does, have him field a few kicks, see what his kick return game is like. But they opted not to. We'll probably see Price at fullback this week, which in a game that's probably going to be tighter. I mean, Hull KR were very disappointing against Wigan last week. Too many errors, too many areas of possession turnover where you just don't want to see a ball go to ground. Sam Wood, debuting for Hull KR, had a really rough night under the high ball. And as soon as Wigan identified that, tons of opportunities and just put the high ball his way. But I don't think we'll be seeing him this week, with the word that Ethan Ryan could be set to come back from injury for Hull KR this week. The young man that signed from Bradford last year, been nursing a wrist injury, I believe, but should be back and he'll be there raring to go. He's a good finisher. He's good under the high ball. So we'll have to see how he fares, and whether Tony Smith opts to use Ethan Ryan as a replacement for Sam Wood, or whether he's going to give Sam Wood a chance to redeem some of his errors of last week. But I mean, the Giants looked really good. They could have had plenty more tries. Danny Levi controlling the ruck area was really impressive. Theo Farge constantly looking for areas. We saw him run the ball plenty of times. We saw him really take the game to Toulouse and really trying to open the game out with players off the shoulder. Thought the Huddersfield pack was really impressive. Yates, first game as captain, really strong performance from him, putting his body about, got through the meters, plenty of work, plenty of strong carries. So the Hull KR are going to have to limit Yates, making sure that he's not going to have free roam at the middle of the field, and making sure that they can cut down Huddersfield's opportunities as they work towards the edges, and making sure that to keep them out. I mean, there were some positives to take from Hull KR's performance last week. I thought that there were strong in patches. Lynette had another strong game. Sean Kenny Dowell just eating up meters on the edge again. We didn't really see much of Ryan Hall last week. I thought that Hull KR's ball distribution could have been a lot better. We saw the Mikey Lewis try, a little bit of fleet of foot after a show and go at the line. He's got a really promising future ahead of him, but Hull KR are going to have to rely on team efforts rather than individual moments of brilliance to get them through this game, because this is, we said it last week in the show, Huddersfield could potentially be a revelation for this season. They could be the Smokies that are there or thereabouts for fourth spot this season. And last week was real testament to that. And if they can get a convincing win against Hull KR, I think that will be a real notch in their belt. think it'll quieten down a lot of potential critics and really show their potential for this year. Because, I mean, they've been heavily discredited. People have said, okay, you've done it against Toulouse, but do it against one of the top four, and doing it against a side that, you know, made it to the semi-finals of the playoffs last year and were 80 minutes away from a grand final would really be an indictment of just how successful Huddersfield could be this year if they can get their act together. And that's why I'm going to tip Huddersfield for this game. I think that they've got the stronger looking side. I think that they've got the better play systems. So I can see Huddersfield running out 13 plus for this one. I can't see Hull KR getting off the line. I mean, they're missing one of their key enforcers in Albert Vete. He's gone for 2 games through suspension, and he'll be a huge loss through the middle. He gets through good yards. He's there to take the big carries, the important carries coming off your line, and, you know, in the danger areas. So he's going to be a miss. Elliot Minchella is reportedly coming back after he ran out for Dewsbury last week. So it's likely that Minchella will probably take Vete's place for this game. But overall, I'm going to have to say Huddersfield 13 plus for this one, just based on how the two sides performed last week. If Huddersfield can do it consistently, then they have a good chance of being a top 4 side. But a loss here would really harm their chances for me. I think these are the games that they need to win. So with that, we'll move on to Saturday's final game, and it is a suspension and injury hit. Catalans Dragons taking on Wakefield Trinity. Wakefield missing one player through suspension this week, and that is centre Reece Lynn. He's done for 3 games, I believe it was. So going to be a little bit of a change up on the edges for Wakefield Trinity, and that's their only expected enforced change. On the other side, you have Gil Dudson and Dylan Napa, both missing a multitude of games. Napa gone for a shoulder charge, while Dudson done for punching. Both went to Tuesday's tribunal, both given an excess of 3 games. So they will obviously serve their first match ban here against Wakefield when Wakefield travel to France over the weekend. We've not seen any team news out of Wakefield at the minute, so we're going to have to see whether they're potentially missing players through vaccination entry issues, as we've seen France really cracking down on this. We're not too sure at the moment who is vaccinated and who isn't in Super League, so we could be seeing issues on that front. The other loss to this Catalan side is influential forward Julian Busquet. He misses out through a forearm fracture that he picked up against St. Helens. You saw him leave the field carrying his arm. He's just undergone surgery in the last day or so to have that corrected. So he's going to be missing for this game and probably the next 2 to 3 months. But Catalans, really hard to look past. I think Wakefield struggled in areas last week against what is not a very strong or very impressive Hull FC side at the minute. The Dragons, it was a bad week, but it was a bad week against the most dominant side in Super League right now. Probably one of the most dominant sides we've seen since the 2015 Rhinos, you know, the early 2000s Bradford Bulls. It's really tough to go to St. Helens and try and steal a win based on how they perform and just how well drilled they are at the minute. I can see the Dragons stealing a win here. And the only reason I say that is just the individual moments of brilliance from the likes of Drinkwater and Tompkins. You know, we didn't really see much of Mitchell Pearce. But then again, Catalans didn't have much of the ball. We didn't see a great deal of Tyrone May. We probably will this week. So it's going to be really, really important that Catalans get off to a good start, though. I think that last week they got a good start and then rested on their laurels a little bit and just allowed St. Helens to come at them and apply pressure. If they can avoid falling into that trap this week, stealing some early points and keeping Wakefield out, then we could potentially see a big Catalans win here. And, it's really, really important that Catalans get off to the best possible start. They had a really, really rough time of it last week. So if they can feel their way back into this game and hold Wakefield 2-0 for the first 20, 30 minutes, we've seen Wakefield are a confidence team. If you keep them to that 0, they struggle. They don't really grow into games. So I think Catalans 13 plus for me, if they can score in the first 20. If not, Catalans 1-12. Just because the Gilbert Brutus is such a fortress. We see teams time and time again go to France and come away with absolutely nothing in games that they should have been heavy favourites for. And it's just one of them games where I can't see Wakefield really growing into this, and especially if they're potentially missing players as well. So with that, we'll go to the final game of the round, and it is Salford versus Toulouse. Toulouse will make the trip across to Salford this week after playing their first home game in France. Salford, obviously heavy favourites for this one after picking up a shock win at Castleford last week. The Brodie Croft, Max Sneed combination, two experienced halves working really well, really putting pressure on teams to try and break down that Salford system. Their forward pack, Vunia Yawa and Akuala both coming in, really eating up meters, really putting pressure on teams to try and find ways to stop them from rolling through the middle. Thought they were both very impressive. And Salford could, at the beginning of the season, I thought that Salford could potentially be, in pre-season, I thought that Salford could potentially be one of your bottom 4 sides. But based on how Salford played last week and showing that experience and that cool head that they've not had since that 2019 season, where they made it all the way to the grand final, we could see Salford finish anywhere from 5th to 8th for me. I think that Sneed brings a composure to the side. I think that Croft brings a little bit of creativity. Having Brierley at the fullback, a little bit of a creative spark. Again, we see it with halves that have made that fullback transition. So for me, Salford are the heaviest of favourites in this one. 13 plus easily for me. I thought Toulouse had moments of brilliance. I thought Guy Armitage playing out in the centres, the rugby union code hopper, former England international, thought he was really strong when he carried the ball. Thought a few of their forwards had good stints through the middle of the park as well. But Salford, for me, are the easy pick for this one. I can't see Toulouse hanging with them at any point. Do I think it's going to be a bloodbath and we're going to see Salford pour on 40, 50 points? No. If I was going to have a crack at a score prediction, I'd probably say we're looking at a 34-12 win in favour of the Red Devils. I just think that the attacking systems of Salford are a lot better. I think that under new management, Salford are looking a lot better. They've got a few more experienced campaigners in them that have done their rounds of Super League and are really battening down the edges and making teams work. I think the acquisition of Joe Burgess in the off-season is huge. I thought that he had a great game. We saw him in a few involvements on the wing and setting up that Dion Cross try as well. So it's just going to be too much for Toulouse for me. I can't see them getting many wins. And in pre-season, I'd have expected that Salford maybe was a game that they could win. But based on Toulouse's performance last week, I can't tip Toulouse either way with any real confidence. So, I'm going to have to go with Salford on this one. But that is all the games and all the team news that we do have available for you. What has been a short and solo show this week. Join us next week where we'll be able to hopefully have the green screen back up and running and take you through some more of the team list. Hope you've enjoyed and I hope that you'll be joining us again. And we'll see you next week for another round of